Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to our Mass Cultural Council webinar today on cash flow planning in a crisis. My name is Michael Ibrahim, Program Manager with the Cultural Investment Portfolio here at the Mass Cultural Council. The Cultural Investment Portfolio, if you're unaware, is the grant program at the Mass Cultural Council that supports our nonprofit organizations, either through direct grants or services. And the services side of things are here, what we're here to talk about today. We've asked Sandi McKinley from the Nonprofit Finance Fund, who's the Vice President of Advisory Services, to lead our webinar today. This is the second webinar of a series of 4. We had a webinar on navigating the CARES and Family First Acts. That webinar is now available on YouTube on our channel. You can take a look at that. This is our second, and then we'll talk about the third and the fourth coming up later in the series. A few notes of housekeeping. And we will be using the Q&A box. So you will have questions. Absolutely, we know you will. So we want to direct everybody to use that Q&A. That way we can organize all the questions. We will have plenty of time for the very end to answer questions. Sandi will answer your questions directly. If you want to submit your questions anonymously, you are more than welcome to do that. This webinar is being recorded, again, to put out on our YouTube channel. So you may not want to put your name or your organization's name out there. So just know that we will be recording and sharing it. So that may change your question presentation. So feel free to use that. My colleague, Kaylin King, Program Officer on the team, is monitoring our chat box. She'll be sending you some information and kind of navigating that a little bit there. But we do want everybody to use the Q&A box if possible. That would be lovely. This webinar is scheduled to be about an hour long. And so again, we will have questions for the very end. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Sandi to lead us through.
Thanks, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate all of you who came to join us today to talk about cash flow planning in a crisis. Let's see. Like Michael said, I'm Sandi McKinley with Nonprofit Finance Fund, and we are really passionate about nonprofits and really the health of the nonprofit sector. And we have a ton of experience with nonprofits and helping navigate through all types of disruptions. What I like to say is, we work with organizations who are going through change, challenge, and opportunity. And the pandemic of COVID is certainly something that is new for all of us. But we do take this approach. We take the approach like that we do with kind of with all disruptions, right? We recognize that there is a time that the time that we are in right now is really our triage. Right now we are going through a time of response and understanding our immediate reaction, and what are those changes to operations that need to happen? What do we have to do? And where do we have to go to get to a safe place? Then we will move into a time of recovery and getting ourselves back online. And then what do we need to think about to shore up the sector and thinking about the next time we go into a crisis? And that's not to sound doom and gloom, but it's to think about how do we make ourselves stronger and better. So today we're really going to be talking about cash flow, which for us is really the first step in triaging during a crisis. I've put this slide in because I think in times of crisis, when we are reacting, we don't know where to start because everything seems so overwhelming. And I like to just take a pause, take a deep breath, and say there are certain things that we have no control of. In today's situation, we have no control over the stay-at-home orders. We have no control over the pace or spread of the pandemic, and we have no control over if our organizations are able to open their doors or not. So that is, you know, those are things that we can't necessarily control. And we have some, and there are other things that we do have direct control over. Today we're here to talk about finance, and how I'd like to frame that today is around us having direct control over ensuring that our data, especially our cash flow data, is accurate, and we can use that in order to make informed decisions during this response period, this response time. So really being able to say what we have control over is making sure that, you know, we can be accurate and help you make some good decisions. We have some control over how we can, you know, being advocates for ourselves and influencing decisions. And so that is also what we are here to do today. I also want to remind all of us that we are more than what our finances say about us, right? We are more than our income statement and our balance sheet. We are more than our bottom lines. All of us on this call are, you know, wake up in the morning to do our work, not for, you know, our surplus or our deficit. We do it because of our constituents, because of our audiences, because of what we love. And so our organizations are built on our strengths. And what we call this is our strengths framework. Some know it as complete capital. But we say that organizations are built up of really kind of four things. First is our data and our know-how, right? Do we know what we are doing? That is like, do we know how to put on the performance? Do we know about, you know, do we know the history? Do we know what we are representing in our cultural programming? The second is really our social capital, our relationships and reputation. You know, we are part of an ecosystem and part of a community, and that is a strength of ours, especially in the arts and culture community. And the third is our people and our skills. I mean, our sector is run, it like depends on its people and our passion. And the fourth is really our financial capital, which influences everything, but isn't everything. But those four things together make up our organizational strength. And I don't want us to forget about that, because while we might be struggling right now with cash and cash flow, it doesn't define us as who we are as an organization. So my favorite part of doing cash flow is to just start with my favorite cash flow quote, which is, sometimes I am two people. Johnny is the nice one. Cash causes all the trouble. From you know, Johnny Cash. And I think it's a nice way of just a little levity of getting into a subject that can sometimes be dry, but we will attempt to make it a bit interesting. So we're going to start at a very base level with cash flow projections. In concept, it's not a very difficult or a complex analysis. But what it does give you is a visual landscape or a visual representation of cash that comes into the organization and cash that goes out of the organization during a period of time, over a period of time. And unlike a budget, which shows you a year, typically a year at a time, a cash flow breaks that down into smaller chunks, right? So it gives you an understanding of movement of cash over time. And I'm talking about actual cash, not projected cash. So movement of actual cash over time. It's a real money exercise. And so it's very sobering. And it is also for those who aren't used to doing it, it takes a little bit of reorientation, because cash in isn't the same as revenue, because we're really looking at the dollars in hand, not the dollars promised to us, right? So cash in isn't always the same as revenue, and cash out isn't always the same as expense. So that's really my precursor to this. So diving straight in, how do we do cash flow? How do we create a cash flow projection? Well, first, I suspect if you are sitting on this webinar, if I were to talk with you directly, you could tell me exactly how much cash you have right now. And you could probably tell me exactly how much cash is going out of your organization this week or this month. It's because in my experience and with every executive director, with every finance person, frankly, with anyone who is sitting within an organization who touches the finances in some way, that people know this intuitively. But we really want to get to go through the exercise of gathering the actual records and calculating what is happening and putting that, documenting and putting it on paper, especially now where we know that COVID-19 has disrupted the flow of cash, not just within our organizations, but within the market as a whole. So let's see, we really want to see how that lack of money flowing through the sector and through the market as a whole has manifested within your organization. My precursor here is that details really matter when doing cash flow. We need to know the amount, so the dollar amount, the nature, so is the cash or the dollars, do they have restrictions or don't they? And the timing. So when do these dollars come in? When do they go out? So those are the three things that we need when looking at cash flow. So the next thing that we need to do is plot the cash received and cash spent on a cash flow template. Now I'm going to take a step back here. Normally, organizations will do cash flow on a monthly basis. In fact, that's typically how we at NFF teach cash flow. In a crisis or in a time of like compressed cash, many organizations switch or prefer to do cash flow on a weekly basis. So what I am presenting today is a cash flow based on a weekly cash flow, in a weekly cash flow format. I'm providing you, and Kaylin will probably be sharing this with you, two templates or two tools, a monthly template and a weekly template. Both are ready for you to populate, like just put in your information. All of the formulas are pre-populated. There are instructions on the first tab. So everything has been done for you. All you have to do is plug in your numbers. But for our webinar today, I'm going to be presenting that weekly cash flow, assuming that we're looking at really our short-term, it's 13 weeks of planning so that we can make some of those short-term decisions. So what is the mechanics of a cash flow? And again, this is incredibly simplified just for sake of time and presentation today. So at the top of our presentation, at the top you will see our beginning cash balance, and this is in thousands. I just used a very simple presentation, and that is the cash that you have available, and that the cash that you have available. Underneath that, we have cash received during the week. In this instance, this organization received $2,000 in foundation grants, $1,000 from individual donors, $10,000 that were net assets released from restrictions. In this presentation, we imagined that the organization received permission from a foundation to unrestrict dollars for general operating. And then, so the total cash receipts for this particular week was $13,000. Operating cash out, well, they had to pay their, they had their payroll expenses of $20,000. And so for a net cash from operations, they had a -7, and that got calculated against last week's starting cash balance of $120,000. So this week's cash balance, or the next week two's cash balance, was starting cash balance was $113,000, and that's where they start. And then on week 2, they received $1,000 of individual donors, individual donor donations, and then they had to pay their week 2 payroll of $20,000. Their utilities came due, so they paid $2,000, and then they spent $22,000 for a negative $21,000 net cash from operations, and so on and so forth. So the mechanics of this is in a way very simple. Your organization may have a number of different line items under receipts and operating cash out, and that is perfectly normal. For our organization, or in many organizations, you might have a dozen or more line items in each section. We will talk a couple of things to think about when you're about expenses. Not all expenses should be straight lined or divided equally. Utilities can vary by season, and I think we all know that we don't get our utility bills every single week, especially. This is especially with all expenses and utilities, of course. When we're doing a weekly cash flow, this is especially important. And if you're on a bi-weekly payroll, there will be certain months of the year where there are 3 pay periods. So things just get a little, there's a little bit of calendar math that needs to go along with doing expenses. I put something in here about restrictions, and restrictions right now are a big topic, especially as we're thinking about COVID-19 and how our foundation partners are responding. Restricted revenue, as you may know, is revenue that is bound by time or purpose by the donor. It may or may not be received as cash, but when it is not available for us to use until the terms of that restriction is met. It is best practice for us to manage that cash in a way, to transfer it from restriction and then to convert that cash to unrestricted after that restriction is met. Truth be told, a lot of organizations just treat cash as cash, but we want to think about what the best practices are. However, with the COVID-19 crisis, many donors and foundations are loosening restrictions on grants so that organizations have more flexibility for these dollars to fall into operations. So what I'm encouraging all of my clients to do is to really check with donors to see if they would be willing to reorient their restricted dollars for operations if you are struggling with access to cash right now. And that has been, something that has been a bit of a trend, and something that has been, that we have seen funders being willing to do. However, you need to get the donor's permission to do that before you release that into operations. A couple of special considerations for our arts and cultural organizations. We know that some production expenses incur ahead of realizing revenue, sometimes years ahead. I think that those are areas that you're probably already having conversations about within your organization. So those types of expenses are probably under consideration already. But also right now, there's a lot of conversation around subscription and ticket receipts. Because most of our organizations are not performing or closed right now, that deferred revenue, which is sitting on the balance sheet as a liability until the show is delivered, is kind of stuck, right? We're supposed to be holding on to that, that revenue, that deferred revenue, that cash, until the show is performed or the service is delivered. Many organizations are asking their patrons to release those dollars as a donation so they can use it for operations. And then, or they are issuing rain checks. So this, I'm just noting this as some dynamics that we are seeing in the sector, and then ensuring that, you know, if this is something that your organization is doing, accounting for how this comes into the into your cash flow appropriately. Before we move on, I just want to share some of the missteps that we see with cash flow projections. So not including a beginning cash balance, we have to start somewhere. So start somewhere, even if it's zero. Straight lining income and expenses. So really being accurate in what you are spending and bringing in each week. If you're doing a monthly, not accounting for the accurate number of weeks in a particular month. Let's see, commingling restricted and operating cash, that's a big one sometimes. Getting the balance right between too much and too little detail, and not noting cash in from receivables or incurred from earlier periods. So making sure we get that timing right. So what does this look like? So over 13 weeks, our organization here, our sample organization, went through and they said, what will it look like? They have noted their assumptions. Their assumption is, in a way, like a very stark one, in saying that they are planning not to have any programs or services through for like the first week of July, right? They don't know if they're going to be able to open their doors. And right now, this is a common situation. Nobody knows when operations will be able to resume. So the organization is making this assumption, and I think we're all going to have to reconcile and make our own assumptions about when we expect that social distancing will end, and when we will be able to think about when operations will come back to normal. We're doing some scenario webinars in our next round, and we can talk a little bit more about how do we think about scenarios moving forward. But for today's presentation, we're just, in the next 13 weeks, this organization is taking a really pragmatic view and is not going to, assuming that they're not going to open for the next 13 weeks. And so here we have, and so here they are. We see that over time, they are able to, with their current cash position and their assumptions around what will be coming in, they are able to meet their expenses through the week of May 18th. But the week of May 25th, they have a negative cash balance. They start to have a negative cash balance. And so they have to start thinking about what they will do. Fortunately for this organization, they have a $100,000 line of credit with their local bank, and we have included in our templates an ability for organizations to include their line of credit and budget that and spread that out. So given that they have this line of credit, they are able then to spread out the draw on their line of credit, and say, in this case, after starting the week of May 25th, they are able to draw on $15,000 on the 25th of May, $15,000 the next week, $20,000 the week after, $25,000 the week after that, and then $20,000. But then they run out of money drawing down their line of credit the week of July 29th. And so that's when they really run into trouble. So what do we do? So the next part of what we're going to talk about today is thinking about now that we understand what our cash position is, how do we think about establishing our priorities and responding? We believe that this is a real leadership, I mean, as it should be, a real leadership response. And first we say, let's start with our mission and let's start with our priorities. And what is our tolerance for risk? So we are big believers in kind of reflective decision-making and saying, first, like what are our objectives during this time? Are we here to like are we here to preserve mission at all cost? Are we looking at to make it to a point where we are stable and so we can restart mission like when everything when the economy or when social distancing ends and we can look to recover. So what are what we would call our North Stars? What are our must-haves? And then what tough choices are we willing or do we have to make? And getting agreement among leadership there. Do we have mandates that need to be prioritized? What are those strategic mandates? And do we all understand them? And then what can't we do right now? And I think this is important as well. We have to understand what are our guide rails and what won't we do, and making sure that we stay true to what we won't do. So here's this kind of a sobering, what we kind of call the sobering slide. Our strategies for managing cash flow are very few, right? We only have four options. We have cash somewhere on our balance sheet, or we have an internal reserve that we can access, or we can get cash from somewhere, right? So we have existing cash, and we can somehow unlock that. We can unlock that from an internal reserve. We can tap into existing cash that is restricted and restricted and use that for operations. So that's one option. Our other option is to not spend cash, right? To protect the cash that we have. How do we do that? We can work with our vendors or our lenders and to ask for and negotiate more favorable plans or leniencies against our liabilities or our bills. We can also we can receive cash. We can get more cash, right? We can ask for emergency funding. We can ask funders for, we ask for new funding. We can ask our funders if anticipated funding is still going to be received. Could that be accelerated? And then we can advance annual appeals, or if possible. And finally, I put on there's some of those conversion of funds, right? Is there a way that we can convert funds to cash? And finally, there is the option of borrowing cash. Like, is it appropriate for our organization to draw either on an external line of credit or a bridge loan? And I'll talk about that in a moment. Our internal options, thinking about how do we best manage our current cash on hand, we always like to think about our people first. And this is this is a values call within every organization, but I rarely find an organization that doesn't put their people first. But the first thing that we typically hear is organizations saying is like, how can I make my payroll? And would a different payment schedule like ease my cash flow? So that is something that when people are talking about payroll and am I able to make payroll, one thing that we frequently will hear is like, can I change my payroll schedule and will that help? And then how much, and then the second part of that is, you know, how do I communicate that to my team and employees? On payables, the question is like, which vendors will be more forgiving in this current environment? Especially if you're working with small business owners, they are struggling in this environment as well. But then also, so that is part of the equation. But then thinking about, is there an opportunity then, things for like negotiating mortgage payments with your lender, or it might be like a different rubric. And then expense savings. If you are closed, are you going to be realizing certain expense offsets because of that? The board in these situations, of course, you're going to be keeping close tabs with your board. I personally sit on a number of boards, and I know that I feel like those are my second and third and fourth jobs. And our board members have, you know, the fiduciary responsibility for the organization. Typically, we will say that, you know, there's a distinction between cash issues and cash flow issues. Cash being that you don't have the money, and cash flow meaning that it's a timing issue. The COVID-19 is really a unique situation in that it's both cash and cash flow, right? Right now, there is no cash running through the market, so nobody has cash flow. So one of the reflective questions is, when restrictions on social distancing start to ease, what do you expect cash flow to look like for your organization? How does that factor into your planning? As you plan your response, what are those strategic decisions? How is this impacting your strategy? So how are these cash and cash issues impacting your strategy and your strategic conversations? What has to happen? What is that worst case plan? And like I said, we're doing a scenario planning webinar tomorrow, I believe tomorrow. What is that worst case plan? How do we articulate that? And then also, what are those triggers that like put that plan into action? Oops. And then also using cash flow projections as a way to think about management, right? As a management tool. It's a way for us to plan to survive, right? What adjustments can we make to our cash flow so that we can survive? How can we really tinker or manage cash so that we can make it to safe harbor, which is the name of this program? Thinking about, you know, how can we lend visibility into our overall our planning and our situation? How can we use our cash flow to tell our financial story to our funders and our other stakeholders? So it's really can be a whole enterprise type of management tool, and recognizing that it is, you know, it is a very intimate document that takes a lot of bravery and vulnerability to both look at and share. So my last section is really thinking about debt. We get, as NFF is both a lender and a consultant, and so we get a lot of questions about accessing debt or having debt. Debt is a tool that we have access to as an organization, and it can really be it can be so powerful. We believe in the power of like well-planned and really like the power that good financing can bring to an organization, and it can really be helpful for both short and long-term uses. So we want to be really fully transparent. We want to think about its debt's use. And have a clear understanding of why we're using it and what its intentions are. So I want to just give some things thinking about like debt both, I think this group, this group has debt, and thinking about, if you're thinking about accessing additional financing. Certainly thinking about what the opportunities are, you're probably able to, if you're able to access it, you're thinking, oh gosh, I can probably get more access to capital than I could through philanthropy right now. It's flexible, right? And nobody's telling you how to use it. And right now, some of the terms are really good. Some of the considerations are, one, you have to pay it back. And two, there's frequently a lot of resistance to taking on additional debt. And with the uncertainty in the market, there's also concerns on whether or not organizations are really creditworthy, are able to secure the loan. There's also questions on, what type of loan to get. A line of credit is really for that those cash flow issues, for the ups and downs of the natural ebbs and flows of our business, where a bridge loan is really timing to a specific source, right? So it's saying, I know that the money is going to come, it's just not going to come yet. And that's really what a bridge loan is used for. And thinking too about from whom you're borrowing. Lenders look for, strong management, track record of financial health or strength, strong governance from your board, and just, good financial hygiene, good management, and reliable payment sources. Organizations should look for things in a lender as well, right? Are they mission aligned? Do they know do they understand nonprofits? Is there a connection in the community? Are their terms fair? And is their application process reasonable, or is it just a barrier or insane, and some may say. So we're really thinking about that lender-borrower relationship. In these days too, I would say, are they flexible? Like how are they, are they willing to work with us? Are they willing to work with you? So for now, that's all I have. I'm happy to take questions and hear your feedback.
Okay, thank you so much, Sandy. As we went through that pretty clearly, I also wanted to mention in our chat box that Sandy's presentation is already available, so you can, Kaylin has been putting it on the chat box. If you want to grab that right now, you more than are welcome to do that. Also, all of the tools and templates that Sandy has mentioned today, particularly those Excel documents for the cash flow with the formulas built in, are also available to you right now. So you can go ahead and access our Dropbox and get those right now. You'll also see materials from our previous webinar in the series where we really talked about the CARES and the Family First Acts. I know some of you are applying for those SBA loans or looking for that as additional revenue, particularly the PPP, the Payroll Protection Program. So if you missed anything from that webinar yesterday, you can access that in our files. Yeah. So Sandy, with that, we've got one question. If you do have questions, feel free to put it in the Q&A. We'll be happy to answer it.
So the first question, it was about the PPP, and I'll answer it. It says, we are trying to avoid laying off our maintenance person, but with the building closed, his work is not essential. We applied for the payroll protection funding, but a lot of questions there. Should we lay off or try to keep his salary going? I think this is up to you, but know that part of the PPP, the program allows you to rehire, and you qualify, like you meet the covenants of the PPP as long as the person is rehired before, like at the time of origination of the loan. So that's a question you're going to have to answer with your leadership team, but there is an option. There is an option for you to rehire anyone you've laid off, as long as that they are rehired at the time of origination of the loan. So the next question is, given the uncertainty of the current financial situation, would you suggest this type of weekly cash flow modeling through the end of the calendar year? I would, I would say give it a shot for the next 3 months. We do it for, I don't know why we do it for 13 weeks. We've always done it for 13 weeks. I guess it's like a quarter, like 1 week past the next, quarter. I have found that my organizations find it very helpful. If you find, I would say try it, and if you find it helpful, keep doing it. It's easy not just to add additional columns onto the template, and I think it gives a good peace of mind to board and management.
Great, thank you so much. We actually didn't have many questions. We put in the chat box, feel free to answer more if you have. We will be offering the same webinar today at 4 p.m. And so if you have other folks from your organizations that you think would benefit, please invite them using the link that's there. And also, if you work with other organizations that you think would benefit, either a volunteer or a board member or other capacity, these webinars are open to any cultural nonprofit in Massachusetts. They do not have to be a grantee of Mass Cultural Council. We actually love that folks, as many people as possible, can take advantage of this webinar. We also will have a copy of this webinar on the Mass Cultural Council's YouTube page, probably in just a few hours. So if you want to share a recorded version of this, you'll be able to do so. And you will get an email from the Zoom platform when all of those materials are all set and done. So feel free to share it far and wide. With that, I don't see any other additional questions, so I think we'll end it for today. Thank you so much, Sandi, for your expertise on this. And for all of you on the call, thank you for joining. We know that you're making some tremendous decisions. Cash flow is one piece of that. And so if there's anything else that you find that of value that Mass Cultural Council can do beyond what we're doing already, please let us know. We are no strangers to do some advocacy for you. And so we are here for that. So with that, have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.